Andrew Carnegie. We all know the name. It means, well, huge wealth, the steel boom, all those libraries everywhere.
Right. An iconic figure.
But if you look closer at that success story, you find something else. A really complex picture, sometimes kind of troubling, strategic mistakes, missed chances maybe, and this drive, this relentless drive that didn't always, let's say, follow the rules.
Absolutely. It wasn't a straight line to the top.
So this isn't just praise. Today on The Deep Dive, we're digging into the key mistakes in Carnegie's career. We'll look at how some, well, gambles actually paid off even if they started questionably.
And where the real blunders happen.
Exactly. And crucially, what lessons are there in those moments for you as you're building your own thing?
Yeah, the takeaways for today are important.
Over the next bit, we're going to break down 7 key stages of his working life, starting from his early railroad days right up to that really nasty split with Henry Clay Frick.
Okay, let's dive in.
So what's really fascinating about Carnegie is this tension, right?
Definitely. He portrayed himself one way, a man of the people, almost.
But his workers, they often faced incredibly tough, dangerous conditions.
Exactly. So understanding his journey means facing those contradictions from the get-go, especially in those early years.
Okay, let's start there. Section 1, the early gambles. Riding the rails to riches. We know he started poor, an immigrant, worked his way up at the Pennsylvania Railroad under Thomas A. Scott.
A classic story.
But that time wasn't just about learning the business. It was also when he made some early investment choices that were, well, profitable, but maybe a bit shady by today's standards.
Shady might be putting it mildly sometimes. You see 3 things happening here, all connected. First, he really leaned on inside information, stuff he knew because of his job at the railroad.
Yeah.
His connection with Scott gave him insights others just didn't have, a huge advantage for his own investments.
Like the sleeping cars.
Exactly. The Woodruff sleeping cars, and there was an iron bridge company, too. These weren't just lucky picks. He knew the railroad needed these things or had plans involving them.
Right. That first bet on sleeping cars, what was it? $217 turned into $5,000 a year. That's incredible.
Astronomical return.
But it does make you think, doesn't it? About fairness. If you're betting using info no one else has, is that really fair play?
That's the big question, which leads to the second point. Potential conflicts of interest. Big time.
How so?
He wasn't just investing nearby the railroad's business. He was putting money into companies that did business with the railroad.
Ah, okay. Direct ties.
Yes. And sometimes he'd even hold Scott's shares for him, kind of hiding Scott's involvement. That iron bridge company getting contracts from the railroad, a perfect example of how tangled it all was.
Yeah, that entanglement, personal gain versus what he owed his employer. It feels ethically murky now.
Definitely murky. And third, there's this early clash between, let's say, his ambition and what he said his principles were.
How do you mean?
Even as he was making all this money, quite young, age 33, he wrote about feeling this chase for more money was, his word, degrading.
Really? He said that?
Yeah. He even vowed to retire in 2 years, to focus on benevolent purposes, philanthropy.
A promise he didn't exactly keep.
Not even close.
Yeah.
So that internal conflict was there, even back then.
But, okay, despite the questionable ethics, these early moves really set him up, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. There were huge benefits for him. First, all that money accumulated fast. That was the seed capital for everything that came later.
The foundation.
And second, being so involved with Scott and these companies, that was an incredible real-world business education, better than any school. He learned large-scale operations, investment strategy firsthand.
And it gave him independence.
Exactly. Financial freedom to eventually go out on his own.
So for someone building a business today, what are the big lessons here? I mean, understanding leverage is key, obviously.
Right, but use transparent legal methods. That's crucial now.
And building networks is vital, but ethically.
Absolutely.
Right.
And maybe the biggest thing, really think about whether your business goals actually line up with your own values. That's a constant check-in you need.
It's easy to lose sight of that.
Very easy. Look at his peers back then. Theodore Woodruff, with the sleeping cars Carnegie invested in. J. Edgar Thompson, the railroad president, doing similar insider deals.
So it was kind of the environment?
To some extent, yes. But the lesson holds. You need that early capital, sure, but how you get it shapes your reputation long term. Understanding your industry's dynamics is essential, but you have to keep checking your actions against your ethics.
Those early shortcuts might have sped things up for Carnegie.
Yeah, they planted seeds of doubt, didn't they?
Yeah.
Problems that surfaced later. It's a warning about prioritizing that long-term reputation.
Okay, let's move to section 2. Striking out alone, he leaves the railroad. This is around 1865, starts getting into various things on his own.
Right, the transition from employee to full-on entrepreneur, telegraphs, iron bridges, other ventures.
And his approach here seems different. More about the deal than the business itself sometimes.
That's a good way to put it. What stands out in this phase is his strategy wasn't always about building something to last. Often the main goals seemed to be making these companies look good enough to get bought out.
Like flipping companies.
Kind of, yeah. This short-term focus, positioning them as up-and-comers just to attract a bigger fish, that's the first key point here.
And the downside of that?
Well, you might not focus on building real sustainable value. It could be more about appearances than solid foundations.
Just staging it for a sale, which links to the second point, right? He's making good money, over $50,000 a year, which was huge then.
Huge.
But he's still not satisfied. Still feeling that pursuit of money is degrading.
Yes, that discomfort persists. Even with significant success, that feeling is still there. It suggests, maybe a lack of real fulfillment from just the money, questioning the why behind it all.
That internal conflict again.
Exactly. And that probably feeds into the third aspect of this period. He kind of underestimated what it takes to build something truly significant long-term.
You mean the vow to retire early?
Yeah, that promise to quit by 35 for philanthropy.
Huh.
Given his incredible ambition and his focus on making more money, just wasn't realistic, was it?
No, his actions didn't match those words at all.
It shows how ambition can just, steamroll other goals sometimes.
Okay, but even if the vision wasn't always long-term, these ventures weren't failures, were they?
Oh, not at all. They served a purpose. This period proved he could succeed outside the railroad's shadow. He could build and sell companies profitably. That validation was important.
And it brought in cash.
A lot of cash. Investment capital that was absolutely essential for the steel empire to come. Plus, dabbling in different industries like telegraphs and bridges gave him a much wider view of how markets worked.
Valuable experience.
Incredibly valuable. So, for entrepreneurs listening, the takeaways are pretty direct.
Be clear on your goals, growth or exit.
Yes, define that. Is it long-term impact or a strategic sale? Also, remember that money alone might not bring fulfillment. You need something more.
And if you are aiming for an exit,
It can be smart, positioning for acquisition. But don't let that completely overshadow building a genuinely solid, valuable business underneath.
makes sense. Who were the players then? Western Union and telegraphs.
Right, the big one everyone wanted to sell to. And lots of smaller telegraph companies trying the same thing. Even giants like Cornelius Vanderbilt use similar buyout tactics to consolidate industries.
So the lessons here are,
Strategic exits. Good for capital. But if that's all you focus on, you limit your impact.
find meaning in the building itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And keep ambition grounded with realistic goals. Know what truly drives you.
Okay, section 3. This feels like the big pivot. Embracing steel and doing it right in the middle of the panic of 1873.
A massive turning point. He sees the Bessemer process, this new, cheaper, faster way to make steel that just blew the old iron industry away.
And he decides, this is it.
Steel is the future. And he commits everything to building a huge steel plant, just as this massive economic crisis, the Panic of 1873, hits.
Talk about timing. Huge risk.
Colossal risk.
Hmm.
But it also created opportunities, maybe unexpectedly.
But this is also where we see a move that raises eyebrows, personally. Abandoning Tom Scott, his old mentor.
Yeah, that's tough to look at. Scott was facing financial ruin during the panic. Carnegie, who owed Scott a lot from his early days,
Didn't help him out.
nope, chose to protect his own finances, which were also shaky because of the panic and his big steel bet. It looks like a major breach of loyalty. Ethically questionable, definitely damaged that relationship.
A hard choice, maybe, but it looks cold.
It does. And secondly, tied to that, he seems to consciously cut ties with his past. He distanced himself from Scott and sort of from that whole chapter of his life.
Why? Just focus.
Seems like it. Laser focus on steel, a willingness to just discard relationships if they didn't serve his immediate ambition anymore.
The risk there is losing valuable connections, different viewpoints, becoming too isolated.
Exactly. A very transactional approach to people, potentially.
And the third thing here that looks like a mistake, at least at first glance, is the timing itself. Pouring money into a giant factory when the economy is collapsing.
It looked incredibly reckless from the outside. The potential for losing everything was very, very real if steel didn't take off or the depression lasted too long.
But it worked out. Why? What were the upsides?
Well, the panic itself created an advantage. Suddenly, materials and labor were much cheaper, like 25% cheaper, a huge saving on his setup costs. That counter-cyclical move paid off.
Okay, interesting. Turn the crisis into an advantage.
And his bet on steel over iron. Spot on. He saw the future accurately, way ahead of many competitors still stuck on iron.
Visionary.
And finally, starting big in a down market meant when things picked up, he was ready. Less competition initially, so he could grab a huge chunk of the market right away.
So for entrepreneurs today, what's the play here?
Well, first, recognize those game-changing technologies. Like Carnegie saw with Bessemer Steel, you have to spot those shifts.
And maybe consider countercyclical moves if you have the stomach and the funds.
It's risky, but downturns can be opportunities. But the big caution from this phase, balance that drive with how you treat people, that ruthless focus. It can cost you personally.
Who else was around in steel then? Bessemer himself.
Right. Henry Bessemer, the inventor. There was William Kelly in the U.S. who experimented earlier but didn't scale it like Bessemer. Carnegie's main competitors were the existing U.S. mill owners, mostly still focused on iron for rails.
So the lessons are, downturns can be launch pads.
Yep. Investing in disruptive tech is critical.
But be careful not to burn bridges, even when you're focused on the future.
Precisely. That relentless drive needs a human check.
Okay, section 4. Carnegie steel mills are up and running. Now comes the focus on cost, the gospel of cost accounting, as you call it. Efficiency above everything.
Yes, this became his obsession. Driving down costs, maximizing output, reinvesting constantly in new tech, tracking every penny spent.
Sounds smart business-wise.
It was incredibly effective for the bottom line. But this relentless drive had a huge blind spot. The workers.
Neglecting worker welfare.
Massively. The push for efficiency often directly meant lower wages, brutal hours, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week was common.
Unbelievable.
Dangerous conditions, too. And constant job insecurity as machines came in. The result? Terrible morale, resentment building, huge risks of accidents and strikes.
An obsession with cost, it seems, lacked empathy.
Completely. Which ties into the second point. He basically treated labor as just another cost on the spreadsheet.
Not as people.
Exactly. Like interchangeable parts in his giant machine, easily replaced or retooled. He failed to see the human side, the brewing conflict his policies created.
So more risk of conflict, zero loyalty.
Pretty much. And the third aspect here, his famous quote, cut the prices, soup the market, the costs, and the profits will take care of themselves.
Sounds like a winning formula.
It emphasizes that cost focus, which worked for him. But it's a bit simplistic, isn't it? It risks ignoring other things, like overall market demand beyond just price, or competitors who might compete differently on quality, service, innovation, not just being cheapest. It's a potential vulnerability. Focusing only on price can mean missing other opportunities.
Okay, so major downsides for the workers, potential strategic blind spots. But the benefits were undeniable.
Well, absolutely. His focus on cost delivered efficiency nobody else could match.
Which let him slash prices.
Consistently undercut everyone. That's how we dominated the market. And being so lean meant he could weather economic downturns better than most. He had resilience.
So for entrepreneurs listening, track your costs meticulously. Invest in efficiency.
Yes, those are good takeaways. A strong cost structure is vital for stability. But, and this is a huge but, learn from Carnegie's failure here.
Don't ignore the people.
Exactly. Don't treat employees just as costs. That's a strategic mistake. And success needs more than just being the cheapest. You need a broader strategy.
Who is he up against or interacting with in this phase?
Well, other steel mill owners who couldn't match his cost obsession. Skilled workers, like the iron puddlers, whose jobs vanished because of his technology.
And his customers.
The railroads, mainly. They loved his cheap steel.
So the lessons are, cost focus is powerful, but dangerous if it's the only focus.
Right. Ignoring the human cost creates conflict down the line. You need balance. Efficiency, market smarts, and valuing your people. Sustainable success needs all three.
Which brings us to section 5, and a very consequential partnership, the unholy alliance with Henry Clay Frick.
Right. Carnegie wanted total control, from raw materials to finished steel. That meant securing coke, which was crucial for steelmaking. And Henry Clay Frick controlled the best coke fields.
But Frick had a reputation.
A very specific one. Ruthless. Efficient, yes, but fiercely anti-union.
And Carnegie partners with him anyway, makes him CEO.
He does, and that's the first big mistake here, ignoring the obvious personality and values clash. Carnegie knew Frick's harsh nature. It was completely at odds with the softer public image Carnegie tried to project.
What was he thinking?
Probably focused on the strategic need for Coke and Frick's known management skill. But the consequence was predictable. Setting up conflict with workers and risking his own reputation.
A ticking time bomb.
Pretty much. Second mistake, giving Frick too much power, especially over labor. Carnegie was often away, spending months in Scotland.
So he delegated the tough stuff.
He delegated critical operations and, crucially, labor negotiations to Frick, fully knowing Frick's hardline anti-union stance. He lost direct control over things that deeply affected his company's values, or at least his stated values.
Which leads to the third mistake, the hypocrisy.
Exactly. Publicly, Carnegie would sometimes make statements supporting workers' rights to organize. Privately, he backed Frick's aggressive tactics to break the unions.
Saying one thing, doing another.
This inconsistency, this duplicity was fundamental, and it directly led to the disaster at Homestead, the cost, a massive loss of public trust. His reputation took a huge hit because people saw the hypocrisy.
But were there benefits to having Frick? Short term, at least.
Yes, there were. Strategically, it guaranteed that vital Coke supply. Frick was, by all accounts, a brilliant, if brutal, manager. Profits went up. Innovations were implemented.
The empire grew under Frick.
Significantly. Carnegie's market power definitely expanded during Frick's tenure.
So, lessons for entrepreneurs today. Choose partners carefully.
Very carefully. Look beyond just skills. Are your values aligned? Especially for key leadership roles.
And be authentic. Don't say one thing and do another.
Absolutely. That gap between your image and reality, it will eventually come out. And delegate, yes, but keep oversight on the critical stuff, like how your people are treated and anything that impacts your reputation.
Key figures here. Frick, obviously.
Frick himself. There was W.J. Rainey, a co-competitor Frick wanted Carnegie to crush, and the unions, especially the Amalgamated Association, the target of Frick's efforts.
And the takeaways?
Hiring for skill without checking cultural fit is risky. Leadership means taking responsibility. You can't just delegate blame. And your reputation is fragile actions. Contradicting your values are costly.
Which leads directly into Section 6, the Homestead Strike, 1892. A truly dark moment.
Infamous. The tensions over wages, union power, they just exploded. It ended in violence, death, and lasting bitterness.
The first, most glaring mistake, the way it was handled. The violence.
Catastrophic. Locking out the workers was aggressive enough. But then hiring their Pinkerton agents, basically a private army known for breaking strikes that was pouring gasoline on the fire.
And people died.
Yes.
Yeah.
A bloody battle between the Pinkertons and the workers. Deaths and injuries on both sides. It was a disaster. It ruined Frick's reputation, but it deeply damaged Carnegie's too, even though he was physically far away.
The consequence was devastating. Loss of life, public outrage, permanently scarred labor relations.
Violence like that is always a failure of leadership. Always.
And Carnegie's physical absence in Scotland during the peak of it, that didn't look good.
That's the second mistake.
Yeah.
The abdication of leadership, it was widely seen as him just avoiding responsibility, hiding away while his company was involved in bloodshed.
It fed the perception he didn't care.
Exactly. It reinforced that disconnect between his public statements about caring for workers and the brutal reality at his mills. Credibility gone.
And then, afterwards, he tried to blame Frick for everything.
That's the third misstep here. Trying to shift all the blames onto Frick, it just made things worse between them. And it looked cowardly, frankly. Didn't help his own image either.
So any benefit from this horror, if you can even use that word?
The only tangible outcome, and it feels wrong to call it a benefit, was purely about control and cost. The strike effectively crushed the union at Homestead and really across his plants for decades.
So he got control over wages, prevented future organizing.
Yes, complete control. It deterred future labor action through sheer brutality. But the lesson here is stark. Prioritizing those short-term cost savings over basic human dignity creates massive, long-lasting problems.
The lessons from Homestead for entrepreneurs seem pretty clear and grim.
They are. You have to understand the human cost of your decisions. Always.
Be present, be accountable, especially in a crisis.
You can't lead from afar when things fall apart. And purely fighting labor instead of finding some common ground. It rarely ends well for anyone long-term.
Key players in this tragedy. Frick, managing the lockout.
The Pinkerton agency, the hired guns.
In the Amalgamated Association, the union they broke.
Right. The takeaways are harsh but crucial. Violence in these situations is a leadership catastrophe. The gap between words and actions destroys trust. and putting profits before people's basic well-being. It's morally wrong and strategically damaging.
Okay, final section, the aftermath. The bitter end of the Carnegie-Frick partnership. Homestead poisoned it completely.
The wounds never healed. Tensions just kept rising, leading to this incredibly bitter public legal fight between them.
What was the main mistake here in this final phase?
Letting personal feelings totally override business sense? That's the first thing. Carnegie apparently made some disparaging remarks about Frick privately.
Which got back to Frick.
Oh, yeah. And Frick was a proud man. It deeply offended him. So business disagreements turned into this really personal, ugly feud, resulting in a complete breakdown. They weren't making rational business decisions anymore. It was about ego and hurt feelings. Lesson: manage those personal dynamics carefully, or they can wreck everything.
And Carnegie misjudged Frick again.
Big time. That's the second mistake. Underestimating Frick's determination. Carnegie tried to force Frick out, make him sell his shares in Carnegie Steel way below their actual value.
A lowball offer.
A massive lowball. He thought Frick would just take it. But Frick fought back, hard, with lawyers. Carnegie completely miscalculated Frick's reaction, kicking off this expensive public lawsuit.
Pride getting in the way of good judgment.
On both sides, really.
Yeah.
Which is the third point. The whole conflict just spiraled into emotion. Hurt feelings, pride, resentment drove the decisions, not logic. It dragged on, cost a fortune, and potentially hurt the company itself.
So logic went out the window.
Pretty much. It became this irrational fight. Lesson: legal battles often take on a life of their own, fueled by emotion.
But there were some weird, unintended consequences from this mess.
Ironically, yes. Frick's lawsuit, aimed at getting fair value for his shares, forced Carnegie Steel's finances out into the open more.
Revealing the company was worth way more than Carnegie claimed.
Exactly. The lawsuit basically proved the company's value was much higher, maybe $320 million or even more. And this public validation
Made it attractive for a buyer, like J.P. Morgan.
precisely. It set the stage for J.P. Morgan to eventually buy the whole company for that incredible $480 million sum, which, by the way, meant Frick got a much, much bigger payout than Carnegie originally offered.
So Frick won in the end, financially.
In a way, yes. The fight indirectly led to a higher valuation and sale price.
So lessons for today's entrepreneurs from this final act: manage conflict professionally.
Definitely. Avoid the personal attacks, the gossip. Keep it about the business issues.
Understand legal options, yours and your partners.
Know the landscape. Lawsuits can have big, unexpected ripple effects, and prioritize resolution. Don't let pride drag things out. Long conflicts usually hurt everyone.
Who are the players in this end game? Frick, the legal adversary.
J.P. Morgan, waiting in the wings to consolidate.
And other rivals watching, learning from the lawsuit details.
No doubt. The final lessons seem to be: personal relationships in business need constant care, especially partnerships. Ego can destroy value. And legal fights, they can have very unexpected outcomes.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Carnegie's mistakes, what are the core takeaways for you, the listener?
I think a few things really stand out. That constant tension, balancing the drive for profit with genuinely caring for people.
Your public image versus the reality inside your company, they need to align.
Right. Authenticity matters. And ambition. It's essential, but it needs an ethical rudder. It needs values guiding it.
Carnegie's story, with all its incredible success, but also these major errors, it's a powerful reminder, isn't it? Lasting success isn't just about piling up money.
Absolutely not. It's more complex than that.
Which leads us to a final thought, something for you to think about further.
Yeah, question to mull over. In today's world, how do you as an entrepreneur really balance aggressive business strategies with genuine ethical behavior and social responsibility?
Especially thinking about Carnegie's Gilded Age way of doing things compared to today's ideas about, say, stakeholder capitalism, ESG, things like that.
How do you navigate those competing pressures effectively now? It's maybe the central challenge for ambitious, ethical leaders today. Something to keep front of mind as you build your own path.
Andrew Carnegie. We all know the name. It means, well, huge wealth, the steel boom, all those libraries everywhere.
Right. An iconic figure.
But if you look closer at that success story, you find something else. A really complex picture, sometimes kind of troubling, strategic mistakes, missed chances maybe, and this drive, this relentless drive that didn't always, let's say, follow the rules.
Absolutely. It wasn't a straight line to the top.
So this isn't just praise. Today on The Deep Dive, we're digging into the key mistakes in Carnegie's career. We'll look at how some, well, gambles actually paid off even if they started questionably.
And where the real blunders happen.
Exactly. And crucially, what lessons are there in those moments for you as you're building your own thing?
Yeah, the takeaways for today are important.
Over the next bit, we're going to break down 7 key stages of his working life, starting from his early railroad days right up to that really nasty split with Henry Clay Frick.
Okay, let's dive in.
So what's really fascinating about Carnegie is this tension, right?
Definitely. He portrayed himself one way, a man of the people, almost.
But his workers, they often faced incredibly tough, dangerous conditions.
Exactly. So understanding his journey means facing those contradictions from the get-go,
Yeah.
especially in those early years.
Okay, let's start there. Section 1, the early gambles, riding the rails to riches. We know he started poor, an immigrant, worked his way up at the Pennsylvania Railroad under Thomas A. Scott.
A classic story.
But that time wasn't just about learning the business. It was also when he made some early investment choices that were, well, profitable, but maybe a bit shady by today's standards.
Uh-huh. Shady might be putting it mildly sometimes. You see 3 things happening here, all connected. First, he really leaned on inside information, stuff he knew because of his job at the railroad.
Yeah.
His connection with Scott gave him insights others just didn't have, a huge advantage for his own investments.
Like the sleeping cars.
Exactly. The Woodruff sleeping cars, and there was an iron bridge company, too. These weren't just lucky picks. He knew the railroad needed these things or had plans involving them.
Right. That first bet on sleeping cars, what was it? $217 turned into $5,000 a year. That's incredible.
Astronomical return.
But it does make you think, doesn't it? About fairness. If you're betting using info no one else has, is that really fair play?
That's the big question.